Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Shadow Operator. Staff Sergeant Jake Walker moved through the compound like death itself, his footsteps silent despite the rocky terrain of eastern Afghanistan. At 34, he was the Army's most feared interrogator, a man who could break enemy combatants without leaving a mark, who could extract information from stone-cold terrorists using nothing but psychological warfare and an intimate understanding of human fear. His teammates called him the Shadow because enemies seemed to simply disappear when Jake was assigned to their cases. What they didn't know was that Jake's methods went far beyond the approved handbook. He was a master of psychological manipulation, capable of destroying a person's mind while keeping them physically intact. Jake's phone buzzed with a video message from his wife, Marissa Walker. They'd been married 8 years, and she was supposed to be taking care of their 6-year-old son, Wesley, while Jake completed his third deployment. Jake had met Marissa when she was a cocktail waitress in a dive bar near Fort Bragg, a beautiful blonde with sad eyes and daddy issues that Jake thought he could fix. He opened the video, expecting to see Wesley's gap-toothed smile, or maybe Marissa complaining about the leaky faucet again. Instead, what he saw made his blood run cold. The camera was positioned in their living room, showing his uncle Herman Newman, his father's younger brother, striking Wesley across the face. The boy fell backward, tears streaming down his cheeks. "This is what happens when soldiers aren't home to protect their kids." Herman's voice came through the speaker, cold and mocking. Wesley sobbed, looking directly at the camera. "Please stop, Uncle Herman. My dad will come for you when he gets home." Herman laughed, a sound that would haunt Jake's dreams. "That weakling? I'm not scared of your daddy, boy. Jake's just a paper pusher who probably cleans boots for real soldiers." Then came Marissa's voice from behind the camera, and Jake's world shattered completely. "He's just a mechanic who only cleans military tires, Herman. He's not scary like you." The video ended with Herman roughly grabbing Wesley by the arm and dragging him off camera while the boy screamed for his father. Jake stared at the black screen for a full minute, his mind processing what he'd just witnessed. His wife, the woman he'd married, provided for, protected, was not only allowing another man to abuse their son, but was actively participating in humiliating Jake himself. They thought he was just a mechanic. They had no idea that Jake Walker was Special Forces' deadliest interrogator, a man who had broken war criminals and extracted state secrets from enemy operatives. They didn't know that he specialized in psychological warfare, that he could destroy lives with surgical precision. Jake's commanding officer, Colonel Blake Turner, found him 20 minutes later, still staring at his phone. "Walker, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Colonel, I need emergency leave. Family crisis." Blake studied Jake's face. The man looked like a predator who just caught scent of prey. "How long?" "However long it takes to handle some unfinished business." Chapter 2. The Uncle's Web. Jake's flight touched down at Fort Bragg 18 hours later. He'd spent the entire journey researching, planning, and preparing for what was to come. His military training had taught him that intelligence gathering was the foundation of any successful operation. Herman Newman, 42 years old, lived in a rundown apartment complex 15 minutes from Jake's house. He worked as a freelance contractor, mostly doing under-the-table construction jobs. More importantly, Herman had a gambling problem and owed money to some very dangerous people. Jake's first stop wasn't his house. It was Herman's apartment building. He needed to understand the battlefield before engaging the enemy. The Sunset Manor apartments were exactly what Jake expected. Cracked parking lot, broken playground equipment, and the kind of residents who minded their own business. Perfect for what he had planned. Jake positioned himself across the street with a clear view of Herman's ground floor apartment. Within 2 hours, he had his answers. Herman was dealing drugs from his apartment. Small-time stuff, but enough to bring serious legal trouble. More interesting was the parade of visitors. A young woman who stayed for exactly 30 minutes. A nervous man who looked over his shoulder constantly. And most telling of all, 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they belonged to someone Herman owed money to. But the real intelligence came when Jake hacked into Herman's phone using techniques he'd learned in intelligence school. The text messages painted a clear picture. Herman had been planning this humiliation for months. He'd been grooming Marissa, telling her that Jake was just a grease monkey and that she deserved better. More sickening were the photos Herman had been sending. Pictures of Wesley crying, with captions like, "Training the boy to be a real man." The final piece of intelligence made Jake's blood boil. Herman had been recording videos of abusing Wesley for weeks, building a collection that he sent to other sick individuals online. His nephew wasn't just a victim of physical abuse. He was being exploited for an audience of predators. Jake sat in his rental car as darkness fell, watching Herman's apartment. The old Jake, the mechanic his wife thought she'd married, would have called the police, maybe confronted Herman directly, tried to work within the system. But Jake Walker, Special Forces interrogator, had different plans. He was going to dismantle Herman Newman piece by piece, starting with his mind and working down to his bones. At 11 p.m., Jake made his move. He'd studied the building's layout, identified the security camera blind spots, and memorized Herman's routine. Getting into the apartment was child's play. Jake had infiltrated enemy strongholds in 3 different countries. Herman was passed out on his couch, empty beer bottles scattered around him, when Jake appeared in his living room like a specter. Jake didn't wake him immediately. Instead, he explored the apartment, gathering evidence and understanding Herman's life. The computer was password protected, but Jake had it cracked in minutes. What he found made him sick. Dozens of videos of Wesley, communication with other predators, and a detailed plan to break the boy properly when Jake was deployed longer. When Herman finally stirred awake, Jake was sitting in a chair directly across from him, perfectly still in the darkness. "Who the hell?" Herman started. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw Jake's face. "Jesus Christ, Jake? What are you doing here?" "Hello, Herman. We need to talk." Chapter 3. The Wife's Betrayal. Herman tried to stand, but Jake hadn't moved from his chair. There was something in his nephew's stillness that was more terrifying than any threat. "Look, Jake, I can explain." "Sit down, Herman." The command was quiet, but Herman found himself sitting immediately. Jake's voice carried an authority that Herman had never heard before. This wasn't the awkward young man who'd married into their family. "I saw the video you sent me," Jake continued, his voice conversational. "You and Marissa had quite the performance planned out." "It wasn't. You were just what?" "Beating my 6-year-old son while my wife filmed it for my entertainment." Jake leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Herman, what did you think would happen when I came home?" Herman's mouth went dry. Something in Jake's eyes looked empty. "Predatory. I thought you were just a mechanic." "Yes, I heard that part. It's fascinating how people make assumptions." Jake stood up slowly, and Herman pressed himself back into the couch. "Do you know what I actually do in the Army, Herman?" You fix trucks?" Jake smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I break people, Herman. Not their bones, though I could do that too. I break their minds. I take enemy combatants, men who would die before betraying their cause, and I turn them into sobbing children who tell me everything I want to know." Herman tried to swallow, but his throat had gone completely dry. "And the beautiful thing about my job," Jake continued, "is that I've become very, very good at it. So good that my commanding officers give me the cases they can't solve through conventional means." Jake walked to Herman's computer and turned the screen toward him. Herman's face went white as he saw his own files displayed. All the videos, all the communications with other predators, everything. "Here's what's going to happen, Herman. You're going to tell me exactly how long you've been planning this with my wife. You're going to tell me about every time you've hurt my son. And you're going to tell me what Marissa knew and when she knew it." "Jake, I can't." "Oh, but you can. Because the alternative is that I make one phone call to Detective Larry Knight at the county sheriff's office. We served together in Iraq, and suddenly your computer gets anonymously tipped to the FBI. How long do you think a man like you lasts in federal prison, Herman?" Herman's hands were shaking now. "You don't understand. Marissa, she wanted this. She said you were weak, that Wesley needed a stronger male figure." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. "Continue." "She's been We've been together for 2 years, Jake. Since your last deployment. She said you weren't man enough for her, that you were just some nobody who pretended to be a soldier. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Jake spoke again, his voice eerily calm. 2 years. And my son, she said he needed discipline. Real discipline. Said you were too soft on him. Jake processed this information with the same clinical detachment he used when interrogating enemy combatants. His wife hadn't just betrayed him. She'd actively participated in his son's abuse for 2 years. She'd chosen Herman over her own child's safety. Where is Marissa now? At your house. She's waiting for me to come over after you get back tomorrow. Interesting. She doesn't know I'm here early. Herman nodded miserably. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. You know, Herman, in my line of work, we have a saying, the best revenge is the kind your enemy designs for themselves. You and Marissa have been so helpful in that regard. What do you mean? Jake turned back to him, and Herman saw something in his expression that made him want to run. You're going to help me give my wife exactly what she deserves. And Herman, by the time I'm done with both of you, you're going to wish I really was just a mechanic. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Gambit. Jake left Herman's apartment at 3 a.m. with a detailed confession recorded on his phone and a man so terrified he would do anything Jake asked. But Jake wasn't done gathering intelligence. He needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal before he could design the perfect revenge. His next stop was a surprise visit to his neighbor, Mrs. Celeste Richardson, an elderly widow who lived across the street and had always been fond of Wesley. Jake had helped her with yard work before his deployments, and he knew she kept close tabs on the neighborhood. Jake, my goodness, you're home early, Celeste said when she answered her door at 6 a.m. She was already dressed and making coffee. Early riser, as Jake remembered. Emergency leave, Mrs. Richardson. Family situation. I was hoping you might help me understand what's been going on while I was away. Celeste's expression darkened. Oh, honey, I was wondering when someone was going to ask. Come in. Let me pour you some coffee. Over the next hour, Jake learned that his nightmare was even worse than he'd imagined. Celeste had witnessed Herman's truck in his driveway at least 3 nights a week. She'd heard Wesley crying through the windows on multiple occasions. Most damning of all, she'd seen Marissa and Herman together at the local grocery store, acting like a couple, while Wesley walked behind them with visible bruises. I called Child Protective Services twice, Celeste admitted, tears in her eyes. But Marissa always cleaned Wesley up before they came by. And that boy is so scared he won't tell anyone what's happening. Why didn't you call me? I tried, dear. I called the number you left, but Marissa said you were on a classified mission and couldn't be contacted. She said she'd pass along my concerns. Jake felt his jaw clench. Marissa had been intercepting communication, isolating him from anyone who might have warned him. Mrs. Richardson, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do might get very complicated, and you might see things that seem concerning. But I need you to trust that I'm handling this situation. Celeste studied his face. She'd been married to a Vietnam veteran for 40 years before he passed. She recognized the look of a soldier preparing for war. That boy is lucky to have you as a father, she said simply. You do what you need to do. Jake's final stop before confronting Marissa was the bank. He needed to understand their financial situation and what assets Marissa might have access to. What he discovered made him smile grimly. Marissa had been systematically draining their joint savings account, transferring money to an account in her name only. She'd also taken out a credit card in Jake's name and maxed it out on purchases that clearly weren't for household necessities. She wasn't just betraying him emotionally. She was stealing from him and preparing to leave him financially destroyed. By 10 a.m., Jake was parked outside his own house, watching through the windows. Wesley was at school, and Marissa was alone. She was on the phone, laughing about something, gesturing animatedly. Jake activated the audio surveillance app he'd installed on her phone months ago, a precaution he'd learned to take with all family members of deployed soldiers. Can't wait until he gets back tomorrow, Marissa was saying. Herman, you should see his face when he watches that video. He's going to be so broken. What if he tries to fight me? Came Herman's voice through the speaker. Baby, you could take Jake with one hand tied behind your back. He's never been in a real fight in his life. The army just has him changing oil filters and rotating tires. Jake turned off the recording and sat back in his car. They thought tomorrow's homecoming was going to be their victory celebration. They had no idea that Jake had been home for hours, that he'd already dismantled Herman's life, and that he was about to introduce them both to the real Jake Walker. He checked his watch. Wesley would be home from school in 6 hours. Jake needed to have the first phase of his operation completed by then. He refused to expose his son to any more trauma. Jake walked up to his own front door and used his key. Marissa was in the kitchen, her back to him, still on the phone with Herman. "I'm telling you, he'll probably cry when he sees what we—" She turned around and screamed. Jake was standing in the doorway, still in his military fatigues, his duffel bag over his shoulder, looking exactly like the husband returning from deployment, except for his eyes, which held a coldness that made Marissa drop her phone. "Hello, honey," Jake said quietly. "I'm home." Chapter 5. The Trap Titans. Marissa's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, fear, guilt, then a desperate attempt at normalcy. "Jake, oh my God, you scared me. I thought you weren't coming home until tomorrow." She rushed toward him, arms outstretched for a hug. Jake caught her wrists before she could embrace him. Surprise. Marissa tried to smile, but something in Jake's grip and his tone made her nervous. "How long have you been home?" "Long enough." Jake released her wrists and walked into his own living room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. "Nice setup you have here. Very comfortable." "What do you mean?" Jake turned to face his wife, really looked at her. She was wearing new clothes, expensive ones. Her hair was professionally styled. Her nails were perfectly manicured, all paid for with money she'd stolen from their joint account. "I mean, this whole arrangement you and Herman have worked out. Very cozy." Marissa's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jake pulled out his phone and played the video Herman had sent him. Marissa watched herself mock Jake while Herman abused their son, and with each second, she seemed to shrink. "Want to try that again?" Jake asked when the video ended. Marissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Jake, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can. But first, let me explain something to you." Jake sat down in his favorite chair, the one he'd bought when they first moved in together, back when he thought they were building a life together. "You see, Marissa, you've made a critical error in judgment." "What error?" "You assumed you knew who I was, what I was capable of." Jake's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "It's a common mistake. People see what they want to see." Marissa backed toward the kitchen, but Jake made no move to follow her. His stillness was somehow more threatening than if he'd been yelling. "You thought I was weak," Jake continued. "A mechanic. Someone who cleans tires for real soldiers. Someone who couldn't protect his own family." "Jake, please." "But here's the thing about assumptions, Marissa. They can be very dangerous when you're wrong." Jake leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what I actually do in the army?" Marissa shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I break people, Marissa. It's my specialty. I take the strongest, most committed enemies of our country, and I turn them into sobbing, broken shells who tell me everything I want to know. And I do it without leaving a mark." The kitchen phone rang. Jake looked at the caller ID and smiled. "That would be Herman. He's probably wondering why you screamed and then went silent." "Answer it." "Jake, I can't." "Answer the phone." The command carried an authority that made Marissa move before she consciously decided to. She picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Hello, Marissa? What happened?" "I heard you scream, and then the line went dead." Jake walked over to his wife and held out his hand for the phone. Marissa looked at him pleadingly, but the expression on his face left no room for argument. She handed him the phone. "Hello, Herman." Dead silence on the other end. "I think you and I need to have another conversation. Why don't you come over? Marissa and I were just discussing your relationship." "Jake, I don't think." "Herman." Jake's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "You have 10 minutes to get here, or I start making phone calls. To the police. To your landlord. To the people you owe money to. Your choice." The line went dead. Jake hung up the phone and turned back to Marissa, who was now openly crying. "Now, while we wait for Herman, why don't you tell me about the money you've been stealing from our account?" Chapter 6. The Confrontation. Herman arrived in 8 minutes, which told Jake everything he needed to know about how terrified his uncle had become. Jake watched through the window as Herman sat in his truck for a full minute, gathering courage before finally walking to the door. Jake answered before Herman could knock. Right on time. Come in, Herman. Marissa was just about to explain how long you two have been planning this. Herman stepped into the house like a man walking to his execution. Marissa was sitting on the couch, tissues in her hands, makeup smeared from crying. Sit down, Herman, Jake said, gesturing to the chair across from Marissa. We're having a family meeting. Herman sat, his eyes darting between Jake and Marissa. Jake remained standing, positioned where he could watch both of them. Now, Jake began, I've heard Herman's version of events. About how this started 2 years ago. About how you, Marissa, decided that our son needed real discipline. About how you've been stealing money from our account and planning to leave me financially destroyed. But I want to hear it from you. Marissa looked at Herman, who avoided her eyes. Jake, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You thought you'd married a weak man who would never fight back. You thought you could humiliate me, abuse my son, steal my money, and I just take it because I was too pathetic to stop you. That's not. But you made one critical mistake. Jake walked to the mantel where he kept his military commendations. Awards Marissa had never bothered to read. You never actually looked at who you married. He picked up a framed certificate. Purple Heart. For wounds received in enemy action in Afghanistan. He set it down and picked up another. Bronze Star with Valor Device. For heroic achievement in ground combat against an armed enemy. Herman was staring at the certificates like he'd never seen them before. Jake picked up a third frame. This one's my favorite. Army Commendation Medal for my work in intelligence operations. Specifically for developing new interrogation techniques that were adopted service-wide. Marissa's face had gone completely white. You see, Herman, when you call me a weakling who cleans tires, you were insulting a man who has personally interrogated over 200 enemy combatants. A man who specializes in psychological warfare. A man who can destroy lives without ever throwing a punch. Jake sat down across for both of them. And now you've given me a reason to use those skills on you. What do you want? Herman asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jake smiled, the same cold smile he'd used on enemy prisoners. I want justice. And fortunately, you're both going to help me get it. How? Simple. You're both going to confess. Everything. The abuse, the affair, the financial theft, all of it. You're going to do it on camera, with full detail, and you're going to sign written statements. And if we don't? Marissa asked. Jake pulled out his phone and showed them a video. It was Herman's apartment building, with a clear timestamp from earlier that morning. This is federal agents executing a search warrant on Herman's apartment. They're going to find some very interesting things on his computer. Herman went pale. You didn't. Oh, but I did. You see, Herman, when you make enemies with someone in intelligence operations, you don't get to keep secrets. Jake turned to Marissa. And as for you, darling wife, I've already frozen our joint accounts and filed fraud reports on the credit card you opened in my name. The bank is very interested in talking to you. Both of them stared at him in horror. But here's the beautiful part, Jake continued. If you cooperate fully, confess everything, sign the documents, and do exactly what I tell you, I might be persuaded to show mercy. What kind of mercy? Marissa asked desperately. Jake's smile widened. The kind where you get to discover exactly how creative a professional interrogator can be when someone hurts his child. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. 3 hours later, Jake had detailed written confessions from both Herman and Marissa, along with video recordings of them admitting to everything. Herman had confessed to 2 years of systematic child abuse, creating and distributing illicit content featuring Wesley, and planning to escalate the abuse. Marissa had admitted to the affair, financial theft, and actively participating in Jake's humiliation and their son's abuse. But Jake wasn't finished. Confessions were just the beginning. Now comes the interesting part, Jake told them as he reviewed the documents. You see, I could turn these over to the authorities right now. Herman would be looking at federal charges for the content on his computer, plus child abuse charges. Marissa would face fraud charges, child endangerment, and conspiracy charges. Please, Jake, Marissa sobbed. I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Oh, you're definitely going to disappear, Marissa. But not the way you think. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Wesley's school bus would arrive in 30 minutes. Here's what's going to happen. Herman, you're going to pack your things and leave town. Tonight, you're going to drive to Miami, check into a specific hotel, and wait for my instructions. What instructions? The kind that keep you out of federal prison. You see, Herman, I have friends in very interesting places. Some of them work in law enforcement. Others work in less official capacities. The choice of which friends I introduce you to depends entirely on how well you follow directions. Herman nodded frantically. Jake turned to Marissa. As for you, my dear wife, you're going to pack Wesley's things and yours. Just the essentials. Then you're going to take him to your sister's house in Charlotte. Why? Because what happens next isn't something a child should witness. Jake's voice carried a finality that made both of them shiver. You're going to tell your sister that we're getting divorced, that you made some mistakes, and that you need a place to stay while the lawyers sort things out. Jake, please, we can work this out. Marissa. Jake's voice cut through her pleading like a blade. There is no working this out. There is no reconciliation. There is no forgiveness. You chose to hurt my child and humiliate me. Now you get to live with the consequences. Marissa tried one more time. What about Wesley? He needs his mother. Jake walked over to her, close enough that she could see the cold fury in his eyes. Wesley needs to be protected from his mother. The woman who allowed her lover to abuse him for 2 years. The woman who filmed his humiliation for her own amusement. I love my son. No, you don't. If you loved him, you would have protected him. Instead, you sacrificed him for your own gratification. Jake stepped back. Pack his things. Now, he's never coming back to this house while you're in it. The school bus pulled up outside as Marissa was packing Wesley's clothes with shaking hands. Jake watched his son get off the bus, backpack over his shoulders, walking slowly toward the house like a boy who was afraid of what waited for him at home. Jake met him at the door. Daddy. Wesley's face lit up with joy and relief. You're home early. Jake knelt down and hugged his son, really hugged him for the first time in months. He could feel how thin the boy had gotten, could see the faint bruises that makeup couldn't completely hide. Hey, buddy, I missed you so much. Are you staying home now? Please say you're staying home. I'm staying home, Wesley, and we're going to take a trip to see Aunt January. Would you like that? Wesley nodded eagerly. Will Uncle Herman be there? Jake felt something cold and vicious settle in his chest. No, buddy. Uncle Herman won't be bothering us anymore. As Jake helped Wesley pack his favorite toys, he made a silent promise. Herman and Marissa had thought they were destroying a weak man who wouldn't fight back. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. A father who would stop at nothing to protect his child, and a soldier trained to destroy his enemies with methodical precision. The real reckoning was just beginning. Chapter 8. The Hunter's Web. After Wesley and Marissa left for Charlotte, with Jake following at a distance to ensure they actually went there, Jake returned to his house to begin Phase 2 of his operation. He had 48 hours before anyone would expect to hear from him, and he intended to use every minute. Jake's first call was to Detective Larry Knight, his old Army buddy who now worked with the county sheriff's department. Jake Walker, heard you were still overseas. What's going on? Larry, I need a favor. Hypothetically speaking, if someone had evidence of systematic child abuse and financial fraud, but wanted to handle things privately before involving law enforcement, how would you recommend they proceed? There was a pause. Larry had known Jake for 10 years. They'd served 2 tours together in Iraq. Jake, is everything okay? Define okay. Jesus Christ. How bad is it? Jake told him everything. The video, the confessions, the evidence he'd gathered. When he finished, Larry was quiet for a long moment. Jake, normally I'd tell you to bring this evidence in immediately. But given what these people did to your boy. Larry paused. How much time do you need? 72 hours. You've got it. But Jake, whatever you're planning, make sure you can live with it. Oh, I can definitely live with it, Larry. The question is whether they can. Jake's second call was to his old unit commander, Colonel Blake Turner. Walker, you just left 24 hours ago. Please tell me you're not calling to extend your leave. Actually, Sir, I'm calling to request a transfer. Stateside assignment. My family situation has become complicated. Blake was quiet for a moment. How complicated? Jake gave him a sanitized version of events. When he finished, Blake's voice had turned ice cold. Jake, you know I have connections at CID. I could have investigators on this within hours. I appreciate that, sir, but I prefer to handle this through civilian channels. Understood. Consider your transfer approved. And Jake, if you need any resources for handling your family situation, you know how to reach me. The third call was the most important. Jake dialed a number he'd memorized but never thought he'd use. Rodriguez Investigation Services. Jimmy, it's Jake Walker. Jimmy Rodriguez had been Jake's partner in intelligence operations for 3 years before leaving the Army to start a private investigation firm that specialized in discrete problem resolution for military families and government contractors. Jake, man, I thought you were still downrange. What's going on? Jake explained the situation. Jimmy listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Jesus, Jake, these people really picked the wrong family to mess with. Jimmy paused. What do you need? Everything. Full backgrounds on both targets. Financial records, employment history, criminal history, family connections, debts, secrets. I want to know every pressure point they have. How deep do you want me to go? All the way down. And, Jimmy, I need it fast. Give me 12 hours. I'll have a complete dossier on both of them. Jake's final call was to Marissa's sister, Jan Kellogg, in Charlotte. Jake, Marissa just got here with Wesley. She said you two are having some problems. Jan, I need you to keep Wesley with you for a while. Things are complicated right now. Of course. But Jake, Marissa seems really upset. She's not telling me much, just that you found out about some mistakes she made. That's a generous way to put it. Jan, I need you to understand something. Wesley has been hurt. Badly. I'm handling the situation, but he needs to be somewhere safe while I do. Jan's voice became serious. Hurt how? I can't get into details over the phone. But Jan, don't let Marissa take him anywhere without calling me first. And if she tries to leave with him, call the police immediately. Jake, you're scaring me. Good. Being scared will keep Wesley safe. After hanging up, Jake sat in his quiet house and reviewed his situation. Herman was driving to Miami, terrified and completely under Jake's control. Marissa was in Charlotte, isolated from her support network and under surveillance by her sister. Wesley was safe and protected. Now came the fun part. Jake opened his laptop and began researching. By morning, he would know everything about Herman and Marissa's lives, their fears, their weaknesses, their pressure points. And then he would begin systematically dismantling everything they cared about. They had made the mistake of thinking Jake Walker was weak. He was about to show them what strength actually looked like. Chapter 9. The Final Judgment. 72 hours later, Jake Walker had orchestrated the complete destruction of both Herman Newman and Marissa Walker without throwing a single punch or breaking a single law. Jimmy Rodriguez had delivered intelligence beyond Jake's expectations. Herman, it turned out, owed $43,000 to a loan shark named Ricardo Hobbs, who was known for creative debt collection methods. Marissa had been having not one affair, but 3. Herman was just the most recent. More importantly, she had been stealing money not just from Jake, but from her previous workplace, building up a pattern of financial fraud that went back years. Jake's revenge was surgical in its precision. For Herman, Jake had simply expedited the natural consequences of his choices. A single anonymous phone call to Ricardo Hobbs, informing him that Herman had been bragging about having money to pay his debts, but was hiding it in a Miami hotel, had resolved the Herman problem permanently. The last Jake heard, Herman had checked himself into protective custody with the Miami police, begging for protection from unknown assailants. The federal charges for the content found on Herman's computer would ensure he never threatened another child. But more importantly, Ricardo's people would ensure Herman spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, never knowing when his past would catch up with him. For Marissa, Jake's revenge was more complex. He had systematically contacted every person in her life, her employers, her friends, her family, and provided them with evidence of her true character. Not accusations or hearsay, but documented proof. The video of her mocking Jake while her son was abused, bank records showing her theft, communications with multiple affair partners. Marissa's carefully constructed image as a devoted military wife and loving mother crumbled in 48 hours. Her employer fired her for theft. Her friends abandoned her. Even her own family, after seeing the evidence of how she treated Wesley, turned their backs on her. But Jake's masterpiece was the custody hearing. He had filed for emergency custody of Wesley, backed by video evidence, written confessions, medical records documenting Wesley's injuries, and testimony from Mrs. Richardson and other neighbors. Marissa's lawyer, a public defender, since all her stolen money had been frozen by the courts, had no defense against the mountain of evidence Jake presented. The judge had taken 15 minutes to grant Jake full custody and issue a restraining order prohibiting Marissa from contacting Wesley without supervised visitation. Jake stood in the courtroom watching Marissa cry as her lawyer explained that she would be lucky to see her son once a month and only under court supervision. She looked across the courtroom at Jake, searching his face for any sign of the man she thought she'd married. The weak, forgiving fool who would take her back if she just apologized enough. Instead, she saw Jake Walker, Special Forces interrogator, looking at her with the same clinical detachment he'd shown enemy combatants. There was no anger in his expression, no satisfaction, just the cold assessment of a mission completed successfully. "Jake," she mouthed across the courtroom. "Please." Jake turned away without acknowledging her. 3 months later, Jake was sitting on his porch watching Wesley play in the backyard. The boy was laughing, actually laughing, for the first time since Jake had come home. The bruises had faded, the nightmares were becoming less frequent, and Wesley was beginning to believe that he was safe. Mrs. Richardson walked over from her yard, carrying a glass of lemonade. "That boy's lucky to have you," she said, settling into the chair next to Jake. "I'm the lucky one. Have you heard from Marissa?" Jake shook his head. "Last I heard, she was living in her car in Raleigh. Seems she's having trouble finding anyone willing to help her out. And Herman, still in protective custody in Miami. Apparently, he's developed a very serious phobia about being alone." Mrs. Richardson studied Jake's profile. "Do you ever regret it? What you did to them?" Jake watched Wesley climb his swing set. The same swing set where Herman had once forced the boy to apologize for disrespecting him. Now, Wesley climbed it fearlessly, knowing his father was watching, knowing he was protected. "Mrs. Richardson, I spent years in enemy territory, hunting down people who hurt innocent civilians. I never thought I'd have to use those skills on my own family." Jake turned to look at her. "But regret destroying the people who abused my son? Not for a second." Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Colonel Turner. "Jake, how's civilian life treating you?" Jake typed back, "Better than expected, sir. Turns out some missions are worth coming home for." As the sun set over his backyard, Jake Walker, former Special Forces interrogator, current single father, and permanently reformed believer in the power of underestimating the quiet ones, watched his son play and made himself a promise. Wesley would never have to be afraid again, and anyone who tried to hurt him would discover what Jake had taught Herman and Marissa, that the most dangerous enemy is the one you mistake for prey. Some people, Jake had learned, confused quiet strength with weakness. Those people discovered their mistake exactly once. Jake had spent his career protecting innocent people from monsters. He just never expected to find the worst monsters in his own home. But he'd handled them the same way he'd handled every other threat to innocent life, with methodical precision, overwhelming force, and absolutely no mercy. Wesley called out from the swing set, "Daddy, watch me go really high." Jake smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine, nothing like the cold expression his enemies had learned to fear. "I'm watching, buddy. I'm always watching." And in a house across town, where Marissa was spending another night alone, wondering how the weak man she'd married had destroyed her entire life so completely, those words would have sent a chill down her spine. Because Jake Walker was always watching, always protecting, and never, ever forgiving those who threatened his family. The quiet ones, as Herman and Marissa had learned too late, were the most dangerous of all. And there you have it, Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.